We studied this in postmenopausal women. It was a gold standard randomized controlled trial, and we saw for patients who used the device, we reduced the rate of bone density loss by over 85%. This is a very big deal.
We're here with Laura Yecies, the CEO of the medical device company OsteoBoost Health. She's been a VP at multiple tech companies and CEO of 4 startups. She sold one of those startups to Apple. She's the mother of 4 and a grandmother of 6. She has a master's degree from Harvard Business School, and she grew a company from 0 revenue to 25 million. I'm excited to talk to such a phenomenal female and hear about this groundbreaking product for women at risk for osteoporosis. Laura, thank you so much for talking with us today.
My pleasure to be here.
Can you tell us how you started your career?
Sure. I came out to Silicon Valley after business school. That was in 1988. I had really fallen in love with technology. I did a little bit with technology at Dartmouth. PCs had sort of started right when I graduated, and I was very excited by what problems technology was going to be able to solve, and I could see that it was going to have a big impact on our life. So came to Silicon Valley. My husband, also a Dartmouth alum, started at Berkeley Law School at the time, and we never left.
Did your parents encourage you to work and think about a long-term career? From what I read about you, it seemed like you had a really good idea of what the world had to offer, where I think some girls growing up have kind of a limited view of what career opportunities might be available to them.
Absolutely. And in fact, my mother worked full time. When I was growing up, my mom's a physician. She only recently retired. My dad worked until really just a few months before he passed away at 87. So career and work and contributing through work was always an important value in my family. And it was really not just my mother. Both of my aunts had professional careers. One was a dentist, one was a psychologist, and my mother-in-law worked. So I had a lot of both role models around me as well as people who understood my challenges combining work and family and life.
What was one of the more valuable things that you learned in college?
I think the most important thing I learned at Dartmouth was really, honing my writing and communication skills, logic, analytical reasoning, research, delving, quickly in depth into new topics. So very much the process. And that has stuck with me. When I got to OsteoBoost, to this company, I had a lot to learn about this field, and I'm really grateful for my education.
Yeah, so both of your parents were doctors, correct?
Yes.
And it seems like from the interviews I've watched with you that you probably had a baseline understanding of some medicine, but it seems like you've had to learn a lot about human anatomy, even to be in this business role to be effective.
I had a good general understanding and also maybe aptitude for the terms. I also had some familiarity with osteoporosis because it's a common condition. My grandmother had it. I was exposed to it, but I definitely had a lot to learn. I had heard about the medications, for instance, but didn't know about how they worked. I certainly was not as aware of how important osteopenia is, how common it is, how many fractures happen during osteopenia. So yeah, in fact, to me, that's one of the most fun parts about, coming into this job is getting to go deep into a new field. And I was very fortunate that both inside the company and with the investigators and experts who I work with, they were very patient in helping me, learn a lot.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's something that affects so many women. I mean, my mother, she's a petite woman, and she's been told that she has low bone density. And I was watching your interviews and popping some calcium citrate because I'm sure that it's going to be something that has to be top of mind. And I'd never heard the term osteopenia until I started researching you. Could you define that for us?
Yes. Osteopenia is the first sort of stage of bone loss. And it's a definition that it's tied to fracture risk. So we have, if our T-score is above 0 or from 0 to -1, which is 1 standard deviation below average, that's considered to be normal bone density. from -1 to -2.490 score, that's considered to be osteopenia. So you can think about it as almost like prediabetes is to diabetes. But in the case of osteopenia, you do have an elevated fracture risk. And then when you get into the osteoporosis category, it is a very elevated fracture risk. So it's really a matter of degree. And the concern is not the number on that scale, but what it means in terms of our risk of fracture, because that's what we're trying to prevent. So just like high cholesterol, it's not a goal, lowering cholesterol, you want to lower that to reduce your risk of stroke and heart attack. You want to improve bone density and bone strength to reduce your risk of fracture.
Yeah, very interesting. And when it comes to someone's lifestyle and health, I think so many times in America, you wait until something is broken and it's really affecting your life in a negative way. And then the answer is take this drug. And every pharmaceutical will come with some side effect. I think what's so captivating and exciting about OsteoBoost is that we're talking about the prevention stage.
I do think this is an issue in general in our healthcare system. We tend to have more sick care, right? And not prevention. But there's something, even if you take this issue even further in the bone health field, if you look at, for instance, and I think it's very interesting to look at the analogies with cardiovascular, because we do check people's cholesterol and blood pressure when they're in their 30s and 40s. And we do intervene early to prevent that heart attack and stroke later. So we don't just do that when someone has a heart attack. Now, maybe we need to do it more, but there's pretty good adherence to that process. But if you look at bone density and we find out that someone has osteopenia, we don't have a drug that is, for most people, appropriate to use when someone first develops osteopenia. Many of the drugs are really indicated to just be used for a few years, or the side effect profile is such that it's not appropriate earlier. So here we really need a non-drug solution to be able to prevent this condition. And our hope is that in the future, it will be part of prevention, but it could be sort of a supplemental device or a supplemental treatment. Because right now, if someone is diagnosed with advanced osteoporosis and you put them on the most powerful medications, so an anabolic medication and then an anti-resorptive, over the course of 10 years, the typical improvement is about 15%. That's not as much as we would like or need. So we clearly need to sort of layer in approaches, prevention, and then other modalities. And in addition to something like OsteoBoost, things like nutrition and weight-bearing exercise.
Great. And can we talk about, so using this medical device, you have had trials, and I'll say it's not out of the reach of a normal person to get a baseline for what their bone density is. This is a DEXA scan, right? I've done one of these. I think they're about $70. And I would encourage just about anyone who isn't a total starving student to go out and get one of these so that you have a baseline understanding of where you are. And then you've had clinical trials and you yourself have used this product. And can you talk about the effect it had and the usage? I believe it was 3 times a week, 15 minutes a day.
So you asked about a few things. I'll first answer the question about early DEXAs. This is something I'm passionate about because our guidelines have been, do DEXAs at 65 for women. And it's better than never doing them. But by that point in time, you're missing an opportunity to intervene early. And it could be that those earlier, younger interventions are even more effective. And in the case of DEXA, it's quite safe. There's less radiation than a dental x-ray. It should not be very expensive. So, we're proactively getting dental x-rays. I think, preventing a hip fracture or vertebral fracture is super important. And so I agree with you. The guidelines are starting to shift where they're open to the idea of postmenopausal women with risk factors and being estrogen deficient, i.e. menopausal without being on HRT, is considered a risk factor. So I encourage everyone to, knowledge is power. Okay, so switching gears to our trial, we studied this in postmenopausal women with osteopenia. It was a gold standard randomized controlled trial conducted at University of Nebraska Medical Center. And we saw for patients who used the device 3 times a week or more, we reduced the rate of bone density loss by over 85% with excellent statistical significance. This is a very big deal because it's an objective endpoint. It was measured by CT scan at baseline in a year, and it has been very, very rare to show with statistical significance on imaging a non-drug intervention to work in 1 year. And based on this data, we went and applied to the FDA and achieved a de novo clearance. De novo clearances are hard to get. We're a class 2 device. What this means is it's novel. There was no predicate. We had to establish a standard for efficacy and safety in negotiation with the FDA. That process took us about a year, but we got through it. We were the 14th ever device to be approved by the orthopedic division in a de novo process. Now, you asked about frequency, and those numbers I quoted were for patients who used it 3 times a week or more. We did see that the patients who used it more frequently, so 4 or 5 times a week, had an even better response. That's frankly what you'd expect, right? If an intervention works, using it daily should be more effective. And so we do encourage patients to use it as close to daily as possible, but it's also nice to know that even a relatively modest level of use, 30 minutes 3 times a week, had this statistically significant benefit.
Yeah, and can you talk about, because you're a user of the product, what it's like? When Lisa and I walked in and we saw it, we were like, wow, that's sleek. Like I jog in the morning with a fanny pack, and my fanny pack is bigger than that, and I would expect that to weigh like, 8 or 10 pounds, but it's actually...
It just weighs a few pounds. And we did to look kind of like a fanny pack, but essentially it's a vibration pack, and the vibration rests right on the sacrum, right at the bottom of your back, and it's 30 hertz of vibration. And what most people say is that it feels good. It feels a bit like a massage, and that it's pleasant. And so it's pretty cool that something that feels at worst benign, or for many people like a positive thing, can be actively improving your health. And because it's a wearable, you can wear it while you're doing other things. So at home, I have a standing desk, so I often will wear it when I use my standing desk, or if I'm going for a walk, something as mundane as chopping vegetables.
Right. So the product was invented by a doctor. Can you speak to at what stage you were recruited to come in, and what goals the board had in mind for you being in the position of CEO?
Yeah, the company was going. The pivotal trial had started in the fall 2019, and I was recruited in the summer of 2020. And it had become very clear at that point in time that we needed to raise capital. What was very exciting is the company had gotten a $2 million SBIR grant, which funded some of the development of the product and the beginning of the trial. But as I said, it wasn't going to be enough. So my charter was to sort of do everything. I was the first employee. So raise capital, manage the trial, analyze the data, bring in the team. So yeah, I was the first employee, and we were partnering with a medical device incubator, Theranova, and they had done the initial development and got the grant. Our vendor was a physical medicine and pain doctor who was treating a lot of patients with vertebral compression fractures. And so that's the origin. And just getting to that initial trial point was a lot of work. Prototyping, there was actually a pilot study that showed benefit on a blood biomarker earlier. So yeah, it's been quite a journey. And this is, I think, how it is often for medical devices. Prior to getting into the healthcare field about 8 years ago, I worked in software, and you can move more quickly. The nice thing about this is we invested the time in running the trial, the FDA process, and our goal is that this gives patients and doctors confidence that it's going to work and be safe.
I'd love to discuss funding. It's such a black box for people, I think especially for women who want to start a company. Were you educated about angel investors or venture capital in your 20s or?
It's funny because I think now people are educated about that. And, there's such a body of knowledge out there on the internet from Y Combinator and other founders. No, I was educated on the operational elements of the business, and when I say educated, some of that was in Harvard Business School, but some of it was just through my various jobs. So I worked in product management, I worked in software product development, I did user interface, I did market research. I worked with the accountants, so I had a pretty good understanding of finance. But no, I had never raised money, and really even some of the terminology and details of the financing process was something that I had to learn. And I had people who helped me, my venture capitalists who had backed my first company before I joined, the lawyers. But yeah, it's complicated, and I'm really excited to see that there's so much more resource on this topic available.
How did you set up the first few investor meetings? Did you utilize your network from the colleges that you went to?
For OsteoBoost, my first investor meetings for OsteoBoost were not really alumni related. I very much focused on groups, primarily angel groups or VC firms that were focused on women's health. So that's where I reached out to. Now, in the interim, I definitely pitched Dartmouth angel groups, HBS angels, Georgetown angels, and many of them have invested. But that wasn't who invested in the early days, although I did win in 2021 the Dartmouth Entrepreneurs competition. In fact, I have like a Jeff Crow Award Bowl candy bowl in the other room. And so that certainly gave us some exposure to the Dartmouth community.
Oh, yeah. So women who are entrepreneurs and are getting to the point where they want to attract investors and get funding, you'd suggest that they research venture capital firms that are specifically playing in their industry. That's one of the best ways to find a place where you're going to get a higher hit rate.
Yeah, I mean, you need to look at the stage, right? There's VC funds that only invest in AI, so I'm not going to pitch them. And then you can also look at have they invested in similar types of companies or companies where you might think that they would be a fit based on their investing pattern. You can kind of reverse engineer that with looking at companies that you think are models for you who invested in those companies.
It's very helpful.
I think historically, women have been underrepresented in venture-backed companies. As founders, as founders and as CEOs, they've definitely been underrepresented in medical devices. There is a lot of interest in the market for products related to menopause because it is such a big market and it has been underexplored and underinvested for so long. Can you talk about the dual opportunities and challenges of being a female CEO in the medtech and device world, and specifically targeting women's health?
I'm often asked about, raising capital as a female CEO, that there aren't, as not 50%, right? And you graduate less than that is too few. It's hard to know. People will say, did that make it harder for you to raise capital? To me, this is an unknowable question because there's no controlled experiment. Certainly, if you're one of a smaller population, maybe it's easier to get attention. On the other hand, there's unconscious bias. When someone makes an investment, they're pattern matching typically. They're thinking about other founders, other CEOs, other businesses where they've had success, and there's fewer women CEOs. So I don't know how it's impacted me. And in fact, I would say on most days, I don't really think about that. In fact, I think it's rare other than like during interviews, because I think I do what most CEOs are doing, which is, hey, how's my business doing? What can I do to grow it? How can I grow the top line? How can I reduce cost? How do I get the right people? Who are the right investors? What are they looking for? How do I tell my story better? I mean, that's the work, and it's the work for everyone. Healthcare in general, like digital health, actually has more women than other fields. Same thing with biopharma. Ironically, medical devices is a negative exception there. Perhaps it's because the device world tends to come out of, the physical sciences, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering. If so, that's too bad because there are a lot of important medical devices that play a role in women's health. There's been major advances in the OBGYN space with devices, what we're doing in osteoporosis, and then frankly, cardiovascular, so much has happened for medical devices. So it's an exciting field. I think it's a lucrative field. It's a field that can have big health impacts. I I hope to see more women participating.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're flooding into a lot of spaces that women historically were underrepresented. What did you learn about pitching in the first few meetings where you were with investors?
If you agree on the problem, that it exists, how severe it is, what it is, then it's easier to agree on the solution. So if you can't hook them on the problem, it's lost. You can have a very sexy product. The one company that I was involved in where we really had to abandon it early. That was the biggest problem. Was the problem wasn't crisp enough. There wasn't enough consensus on that. And so startups are so hard, and this is something I'm often telling founders. Startups are so hard that you know that problem set statement that you're going after needs to be incredibly urgent, or else the obstacles that get in the way will, it'll be too hard to get over them. So I'll give you an example where we just started testing direct to consumer advertising. And I was told that, be prepared for the cost of acquisition to be very high. What would make that acquisition cost not so high? The fact that people really need a solution to osteopenia, that we don't have 10 competitors. And it turns out that, we're early days. The numbers are encouraging for us. And to me, that speaks to the problem. That problem is real and there aren't good alternatives. So, that the same thing happens with hiring, right? If I'm competing with someone to get a great candidate, they're going to be more motivated to take my job offer because they'll be excited by the problem and what we're doing. So to me, that's where it all starts.
As a CEO, you mentioned building a team. When you're hiring, can you tell us about what impresses you when you look through a resume?
Solving hard problems. And what did they do? Right? It's very easy to be at a big company on a large team or in a team that has a lot of resources, but startups don't have a lot of resources. So I need to be able to see that this person that someone was able to take personal responsibility for solving a problem.
Wonderful. Is it right that a lot of your prior roles were focused on marketing?
Of all the functions, I'd say marketing is where I spent the most time. Product management, customer acquisition, channel marketing, business development, but I spent time in sales. I also spent time doing engineering management. But yeah, at its core, I think marketing is my love within the business world.
So if a woman is interested in getting into marketing, what are some of the most essential skills to be successful in that industry?
This is something that has changed or at least developed a lot in, the last several years. There's parts of marketing that are around messaging and content. And so that can be, around writing. There's a strategy element. Of course, there's a visual element to marketing. Not every marketer works on that, but marketing has become incredibly analytical. And so, the statistics, the math skills, the analytical skills are really critical.
I wonder if we could talk about getting a job offer and negotiations. Because you've been at larger companies where you were in senior roles, in VP roles, where I'm sure there wasn't like a really tight bandwidth and a lot of benchmarking you could do. Could you give our audience insight into how you handled negotiations when you got a job offer?
It's a good question. I think more and more you can do research as to what's standard. And I think if you are well informed on that that helps you in your negotiation. Just say, someone says, what are you looking for? And I'd like to get, at least a standard offer, or I have more experience than average, so I should, be at a certain percentile. Don't take necessarily the first offer. There's been a lot written, so I'm certainly not the expert in women negotiating for more money and some specific tactics they can use to not really be penalized for that. But I think you need to go for it. And, one of the things I'll often say is, if you're hiring me, you want me to be able to negotiate on behalf of the company. And part of that is negotiating on behalf of myself.
I like that. Don't shy away from negotiating. Don't just take the first offer. What advice do you wish you had gotten earlier in your career?
As much as I enjoyed the large company experiences I had and learned from them, I wish I had gone into startups sooner. I think I overemphasized the riskiness of them and just didn't appreciate how much I would like it. And just the ability to have impact, building something from the beginning. I really enjoyed that. And maybe if I were to do it again, I would have done it sooner.
Yes, because it was, I think when you were at Netscape, you had about 200 people under you.
Yeah, about 250.
Yeah, 250 people whose deliverables you're responsible for, but a more focused scope, whereas the CEO of a company, everything is your concern, and you've got to juggle priorities every single day.
Yeah, and you have to put the whole business together. So it's not only juggling priorities, it's trying to get the product to fit with the sales strategy, to fit with the marketing strategy, to fit with your resources available, getting the puzzle pieces to align.
What project are you most proud of in your career? Because there's a lot to pull from.
Well, maybe I'll speak to something recent because it just looms big in my mind, but working on our FDA approval, for me, I'm super proud of it. First of all, because it was something that was difficult to do. The bar was high. De novo clearances are rare for startups. And it reflected many types of work. So it reflected running the trial in a way that the data was going to be good enough to use for clearance. It reflected doing a lot of analysis. We had a lot of back and forth with the FDA. So it required me to strategize, use great kind of logic. I mean, in a sense, almost like debating type skills, bring in other resources, creative problem solving, writing. So I'm super proud of that. And especially because it's something that's going to make a big difference for a lot of people.
When I say the word family, who is your family? Who comes to mind?
Well, I'm lucky that family is a big group. So I grew up in a close, large, extended family. I'm the oldest of four, lots of cousins who I spent time with, grandparents. And now I have four of my own children, six grandchildren. Still close with the rest of my family, and now also my husband's family. So family is very important to me. I get just a lot of joy from that. Friday night's my favorite, Friday evening, my favorite moment because I get my family together for dinner, at least the local family. And when we can have all the kids together, it's really special.
Can you talk about what you were looking for when you were dating and you found your husband?
It's funny because we met on a Dartmouth FSP. We were both government majors and we were on this program. I could tell he kind of had a crush on me, but I wasn't there yet. And plus, everyone in this program, there were, 15 or 20 of us living in tight quarters. So no one dated during the program. A few people paired off after. But I'll never forget when we each had to give presentations on a different topic. And he and this guy, I think his name was Lindsay anyhow, gave a presentation against the death penalty and why that was something that they didn't recommend. And I really believed in that as well. I'm very anti-death penalty. I was like, he's someone that I really like how he thinks. So it's kind of a funny thing. And we spent a lot of time together on that program. And then we got back to campus and kind of got distracted for a few months. And then we started dating. But we have a lot of similarities in our background. So we both, the family thing, we both grew up in big families, close with, siblings and cousins. His dad was a physician. His mom worked in a couple of different careers, as did my mother. So I think we just had a lot in common when we first met, and still do to this day.
And it can happen where in a romantic relationship, a man can feel perhaps threatened if the woman is doing really well in her career or if it's perceived that her intellect might be higher than his. Can you talk about dating a man who wants you to be as big as you can be?
I wouldn't want to date a man who didn't, because I was ambitious, and and it's funny because I actually think we're smart in different ways. Like, there's some overlapping topics that we both enjoy, but then there's a lot of things that we know about that are different. Different ways we try to solve problems. So I feel like we help each other. We talk about work problems, and I certainly, if you have career ambitions and your spouse says, well, that's fine, I support you, as long as, I have no compromises to make, then that's not really support. And I feel really lucky that we've been partners in our careers. I mean, we haven't worked at the same company. We've done different things, but I really try to help each other and balance when one person's super busy or one person's traveling a lot or commuting a lot, the other one picking up the slack.
Can you talk about any impactful mentors that you've had or anyone that you have to thank for success points in your career?
Yeah, I've had a number of mentors who've been important to me, specifically as I transitioned to healthcare and med tech. One of my early board members, Karen Drexler, she's not a Dartmouth alum, but that's okay because her husband is. So, we're
Part of the family.
Yeah, part of the family. Really helped me, think about problems and learn the space. And frankly, all of my board members have mentored me in different ways. Like, I don't think one mentor, people will help with different topics. My first boss at Netscape, Irish Halfglass, was a real mentor to me, not just at Netscape, but moving on in my career. Jim Hammerly, Debbie Meredith, I had great mentorship from when I was at Netscape. When my first CEO role, Bud Colligan, who was on my board, who was one of the founders of Macromedia, I think helped me as I transitioned to that role, and other Meg Whitman, Diane Green, women who I just knew from the community who I could talk to about that. So yeah, very appreciative of that, and try to pay it forward.
Yes, right. And you've also sent the ladder down, so to speak. You've been a part of formal mentorship programs.
Yes, both, Dartmouth students. I was involved in a program a number of years ago called Tech Women, where we hosted women from the Middle East. That was a State Department program. Yeah, there's been a number of sessions. I try to write things like this podcast. It's really about hopefully sharing experiences that can help other people.
Yes, I think I heard you mention on one other interview that it occurred to you once you got into these roles of visibility and of power that there were certain people who need to see someone who looks like them in that position, little girls who need to see women in these positions in order to expand their perception of what things are attainable for them.
Yeah, but I believe that, so I can imagine that I would have said that, and it is important, but it's also adults. I mean, this gets back to this VC topic that, I think every company led by a woman that is successful is helping, every other female CEO raise capital or attract employees.
A slightly technical question, which is, you said marketing is near and dear to your heart. And in marketing this product, there's a challenge of the trials and FDA approval, and then there is the challenge of reimbursement and payments. I'm curious if you have had a goal in mind, like if the board specifically set a goal for commercialization for what that would look like, and or exits, the possibility of acquisition. Like how have you navigated all of the options and the things that are just hard to get done in this field?
Yeah. So right now we're very much focused on commercialization. So we launched the product in May and we did all this work to bring it to market. And so now we want to get it in patients' hands. And that's both marketing to the patients as well as to the physicians because it's a prescription product. So yes, the board has set goals around commercialization, as you'd expect, and aggressive ones. And of course, when I pitch the company to investors, I talk about our goals on commercialization. So that's, of course, very important. Now, reimbursement is something that can be very tricky for medical device companies. It typically takes longer for devices than for drugs, but we know it's important because there's a high percentage, I don't know what that percentage is, but a significant percentage of patients for whom it won't be accessible without reimbursement. And so that's something that we're working on, and I'm optimistic we'll get through that process. We also didn't want to wait to bring this to market until we had reimbursement. And so, that's kind of a dance we're navigating.
So if I'm a woman who has osteopenia or I'm concerned about bone density loss, how can I get my hands on an OsteoBoost device?
Come to our website, osteoboost.com, and there's a shop button. And so, we have lots of educational information on the website, even some webinars that we've conducted, but you can order the device there, and it's a pretty simple purchase process. At the end of that process, you'll be prompted to get a prescription. And there's really two ways you can do that. One is to work with your personal physician and have them order through their EMR or use our fax form or call the pharmacy. We do have a pharmacy called Health Warehouse that validates the prescription and drop ships the product to the patient. We also have a partnership with a telehealth company. So you can click on that link at the end of the purchase process, pay $30, and it's all asynchronous through kind of web form, and you can get your prescription and it goes directly to the pharmacy. So we're trying to make it very easy for patients. You can use your FSA or HSA. In addition to the device, we have an app which is free to download from the App Store, the OsteoBoost, and that helps you be successful with the device. It also has education on osteoporosis, a nutrition, calcium tracker, and we last summer acquired a company called Wellen, which had built an osteoporosis exercise program. And so if you buy OsteoBoost, you have a 1-year subscription to Wellen included, and Wellen is still available as a standalone solution.
Wonderful. Laura Yecies, thank you so much for your time. We're so excited to see where this device goes and all of the lives that it touches.
Thanks for the opportunity to share it with you.